Yes, you. Welcome to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast, a podcast for people who want to disrupt their lives for a good reason, to make it count. I'm your host, Jen Glantz, and every week I'll drop a new episode with stories from real people just like you, who woke up one morning and decided to make big changes, starting with small things. We'll cover topics like entrepreneurship, love, failure, and self-care. Hey, you're not getting any younger, so let's make this an adventure. Ready? Okay, I'm super excited to tell you about a partnership I did with Happy Box. We created the ultimate engagement gift box, perfect for anybody in your life who is recently engaged. Inside of the gift box, you get the newlywed card game, a bride koozie, a candle, a heart-shaped sleep mask, and a ring-shaped balloon, which is perfect for all of the pictures that person will be taking, plus a personalized card where you can write any note inside. This is offered to you just in the month of July. Head to the Happy Box store, go to the collections, you'll see the engagement gift box, and make sure you use code B4H, that's B, the number 4H, for $5 off. Go out there and send this gift to anybody you know who is recently engaged. Hey, any youngers, it's me, your host, Jen Glantz, back with another episode of the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast. I am so excited for today's episode because we have a guest on the show who is one of my favorite people to follow on social media. This person, I feel like, posts the most interesting, engaging stories that bring you into his adventures. You know, a lot of people use social media to showcase the highlight reels of their life, and they don't share all the information. You're not even sure what you're watching half the time. But this person on social media, I always get a kick out of his stories because he really uses strong storytelling techniques, and he's super engaging. However, that is not what we are talking about on the podcast today, but I will tell you who we are talking about. I had the pleasure of talking to Nick Gray on the podcast. Nick Gray was the founder of a company called Museum Hack and is the author of a brand new book called The 2-Hour Cocktail Party: How to Build Big Relationships with Small Gatherings. The book gives you every single step you need, from what kind of invitations to send out, to how to find people to invite to your party, to what you should have at your party, to also how to deal with the first 20 minutes of the party, which can be the most awkward, and so much more. The book is really cool, especially if you're somebody who wants to make new friends, bring together groups of friends, or just become a better host in general. I talked to Nick on the podcast today about my favorite phrase, being socially awkward. I admitted to Nick about how I feel chronically socially awkward about a party I recently hosted where I said something really strange to a person, and after I said that, I just completely shut down. I also told him about how I was in an awkward situation recently at a dinner party where I was like sitting on it was a rectangle table, and I was sitting on the end of the table, and I was completely cut out of all the conversation. And when you have that seat at the table, it is the worst because you literally cannot jump into conversation and you feel so left out. Basically, this entire episode is me confessing all of my social awkwardness problems to Nick and getting some really solid advice from him. So let's dive in. I am so excited for you to meet Nick Gray and to learn more about what he is, who he is, and how he became the best party host ever. I'll be back next week with a new episode. All my love, Jen Glantz. Hey, any youngers, it's me, your host, Jen Glantz, back with another episode of the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast. I am so excited for today's episode because we have a guest on the show who is one of my favorite people to follow on social media. This person, I feel like, posts the most interesting, engaging stories that bring you into his adventures. You know, a lot of people use social media to showcase the highlight reels of their life, and they don't share all the information. You're not even sure what you're watching half the time. But this person on social media, I always get a kick out of his stories because he really uses strong storytelling techniques, and he's super engaging. However, that is not what we are talking about on the podcast today, but I will tell you who we are talking about. I had the pleasure of talking to Nick Gray on the podcast. Nick Gray was the founder of a company called Museum Hack and is the author of a brand new book called The 2-Hour Cocktail Party: How to Build Big Relationships with Small Gatherings. The book gives you every single step you need, from what kind of invitations to send out, to how to find people to invite to your party, to what you should have at your party, to also how to deal with the first 20 minutes of the party, which can be the most awkward, and so much more. The book is really cool, especially if you're somebody who wants to make new friends, bring together groups of friends, or just become a better host in general. I talked to Nick on the podcast today about my favorite phrase, being socially awkward. I admitted to Nick about how I feel chronically socially awkward about a party I recently hosted where I said something really strange to a person, and after I said that, I just completely shut down. I also told him about how I was in an awkward situation recently at a dinner party where I was like sitting on it was a rectangle table, and I was sitting on the end of the table, and I was completely cut out of all the conversation. And when you have that seat at the table, it is the worst because you literally cannot jump into conversation and you feel so left out. Basically, this entire episode is me confessing all of my social awkwardness problems to Nick and getting some really solid advice from him. So let's dive in. I am so excited for you to meet Nick Gray and to learn more about what he is, who he is, and how he became the best party host ever. I'll be back next week with a new episode. All my love, Jen Glantz. Okay, my first question for you is, tell us who you are, what you do, and also what the last thing you ate today was.
Okay, my name is Nick Gray. I started a company called Museum Hack. I think that's what I was most famous for on the internet. We did renegade museum tours, and that all started when this woman took me on a romantic date to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I grew it into this weird business that had over 60 employees and did these tours at some major museums like the Metropolitan Museum, the National Gallery in DC, and the Getty in Los Angeles. And now I wrote a book called The 2-Hour Cocktail Party that will hopefully convince you that you should host a party for your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues, meant for people that have never hosted something before. It's a tactical step-by-step guide. And the last thing that I ate today was I made some coffee with butter in it. And I added some cinnamon and a little bit of salt, and it was delicious. And I put it in a blender.
Ooh, okay. I've never tried the butter in the coffee. I know that's like a thing. I got to definitely try that out. But you know what really struck me about you is I only know you from the internet. I follow you on social media. I read your newsletter. I would have thought that you were always the kind of person who would be good at hosting parties and would always be the kind of person who was warm and welcoming. But in the beginning of your book, you're like, hey, I'm Nick, and I used to be a socially awkward 20-something. So I want you to tell us a little bit more about those days and how you slowly overcame that.
Yeah, I think that I really connect with people who are socially awkward, and I have a lot of friends who are socially awkward. And I used to be that way. Yeah. When I moved to New York, I didn't know a lot of people. I was awkward at parties. I could never go up like at bars. The first time that I ever went up at a bar and I talked to somebody that I didn't know, and it went moderately well, I could not sleep that night. I was so excited. I was like, you can just talk to strangers and they will be friends with you? That is crazy, because it opened up this whole world to me. Because I thought in the past, the only way to meet people was like through other connections.
Yeah.
And so that happened for me. And I started to go out and make friends. And I would go to networking events and things like that. Networking events, most of them are terrible, by the way. Beyond terrible, right? And so I realized for me, instead of going to bad networking events and going to bad parties, I would bring the party to me, and I would host a good event for my friends and new people that I'd met. And that kind of set me off on my journey. And since then, I've hosted hundreds and hundreds of events, and I've taught more than 55 people how to do the same thing. And that's why I wrote this book over the last 5 years to help people learn how to host a good event, because it's not rocket science. Anybody can do it.
I know, but I feel like I have always been socially awkward. I'm 34 and I feel like I'm still socially awkward. Is that something that you think is just a story we tell ourselves, or is that something that just requires more confidence? Like, what's a tip for a person who just feels chronically socially awkward?
Okay, I'm going to tell you the exact tip to be chronically socially awkward, how not to be. But first, I want to hear about you. What do you mean you feel that you're socially awkward? Tell me more.
Okay, I was thinking about you because in the book you mentioned like, saying something like really embarrassing or wrong when someone comes to your party. I just have friends over on for July 4th. I said like the most horrible thing to a person because I was so nervous and I wanted to say something nice. And what came out was just like, she was wearing a shirt from her grandpa. And I was like, oh, I wonder what your grandpa would think of you wearing it to this little party. Like I just said something so awkward,
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
I think it's because I try too hard and I
Yeah.
have the best intentions and it makes me just like word vomit.
Yeah, that happens. I've done that too before. There's a story I mentioned in the book where a woman came to my party and she was one of the first guests. I didn't know what to say. And I said, hey, everybody, meet Laura. She's Mormon.
Yes,
And that's all that I knew how to say. It's not that was bad. It's just generally I don't talk about politics or religion. One of the key things that I tell people, if you are nervous or you don't know people at an event and you go up to them, and I don't know where I learned this years ago, but I said an easy thing to do to go up to a group, to a disarming first thing to say is, hey, are you guys friendly? And by leading with a little phrase like that, which is so silly and seems ridiculous, but people usually laugh about it, or they'll say, no, we're not friendly. And they just joke a little bit, but it's a disarming phrase to know that, I don't know. I think that's a helpful thing. What else do you mean about people that are socially awkward? How did you recover from saying that about the girl's t-shirt?
I really didn't. Like, I swear to you, I spent the rest of the party just being like, Jen, just don't talk, sit in the corner. Just like, I shut down because I, again, feel like I try too hard. So I'll say anything. I also feel like my body language shows I'm a little awkward, right? Like I'll hold my arm or I'll be in the corner kind of thing. So I feel like it's just like a general thing. I find it so hard to know how to start conversations, especially as people trickle in. I know in your book, you have so many great like one-liners and things like that. But for me, it's like, I could read all these one-liners. I can go through these scripts, but how do I shake the nerves, especially when I'm at a party or I'm hosting a party and people start entering?
Good question. Yeah. So I talk about the concept of the awkward zone that happens at every party, but let's drill into your thing a little more, just because I want to use this as a learning moment. So you said that thing, which may have been awkward about, I wonder what your grandpa would think. Well, what happened after you say that? Did the girl leave your party immediately?
No, but she gave me like a look like, like she just like made like a body language signal, like, okay, like whatever. And like walked away and started talking to someone else. And then I feel like I'm the kind of person who reads the room. And if I sense that somebody's unhappy with me or found me awkward, I give up.
And you give up. Okay. Well, maybe she did think that it was awkward, and maybe it was an awkward thing to say. But the point that I'm trying to prove is she didn't leave your party immediately. She didn't leave your party to start a rival party and steal all the other guests. And she didn't like throw her glass in your face and say that was inappropriate. It was just a little bit awkward, and then life goes on, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we say those things and we worry, what is the worst thing that could possibly happen? Well, maybe you said something awkward, but you learned it as a learning moment and life went on. Nothing bad happened. Your physical safety was not impacted. You weren't harmed. And she probably still had a great time because you know what? You had the courage to host and bring people together, and you had the courage to be a host. As we go through this hosting journey of learning to become a better host, we will make some small mistakes. And maybe you'll say something weird and awkward like you did, but I can bet that you got the reps in and you hosted your event. And the next time you host an event, you're going to use that as a lesson, as a learning point, and you're going to be a better host. You're going to get better at it. So I already know that you took this as a learning experience and that you know that you survived from saying something awkward. That happens. So what? Who cares? Move on.
Well, I appreciate that. I want to tell you the other awkward thing I do in my parties. And your book does address this, but when people walk in the room, I feel this insane pressure to get, a drink, a food, something in their hands. And it's overwhelming and it's awkward. They'll walk in the door and I'll say, what can I give you? Do you want wine? Do you want this? I open the fridge. I open the pantry.
Sure.
When people come in, should you give them like a couple seconds to, get comfortable and then serve them? Should you be like, what do you do? Can you just sort of, I know you have like the first 20 minutes sort of thing here, but like, what do you do in the first 10 seconds?
Well, I'll tell you a great story. I recently hosted a party that had about half as many attendees as I think we thought that we were going to have. And it was at an enormous lake house. By the way, I love to host parties in small, tiny spaces like where I live, but I just happened to be hosting at a friend's beautiful, enormous lake house. And it was such a big space that because we didn't have enough people, it felt very empty. Well, you know what I never do is I never apologize for a lack of other attendees. When the first people who arrive at your party, one of the most common things we say is, oh my God, I'm so sorry that nobody else is here, right? So why would you do that? Don't apologize for that. Just thank them. Instead, flip it. Say, thank you so much for coming early. I'm so glad that you're here. And what does somebody usually say when they're one of the first to arrive? They say, how can I help? Right? And so what we think about is how can we delegate duties to get them on the team to help us out as a host? So what I like to do is delegate some duties to those first few people who arrive, right? I ask them to maybe help get people some drinks. By the way, I wrote a whole book about cocktail parties. I don't drink alcohol. I don't know how to make a cocktail. I just have a little self-serve bar set up, and that's an easy way. You don't have to know how to make cocktails to host a